There exists a recognition that dissolves every illusion of separation and powerlessness. When someone finally sees themselves not as a fragment seeking wholeness, but as the totality expressing through form, everything shifts. This is not metaphor or spiritual fantasy. This is the core revelation found in the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard. The human being is not outside looking in, waiting for divine intervention. The human being is the divine, temporarily forgetting its own nature. What changes when this truth is truly absorbed? Everything. For so long, the world teaches that power resides elsewhere. In institutions, in rituals, in distant heavens or future moments. The search becomes endless because the seeker believes they lack something essential. But what if the lack was never real? What if every prayer was simply consciousness speaking to itself? In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this radical truth emerges with absolute clarity. The external world is not the cause of experience. It is the mirror reflecting the inner state that has been assumed as true. God is not separate from humanity. God is humanity awakened to its own creative power. This statement may sound bold, even dangerous to those conditioned by traditional teaching. Yet ancient texts confirm what mystics have whispered for millennia. The power to create, to transform, to manifest, does not belong to something distant or external. It belongs to the one who says, "I am." When someone declares, "I am," they are speaking the same creative force that brought worlds into existence. Every assumption about identity shapes the reality that unfolds. Every belief held as truth becomes experience. Where, then, is the boundary between the human and the divine? The question itself reveals the illusion. There is no boundary. There never was. Bruce Lipton's research into epigenetics demonstrates scientifically what spiritual teachers have always known. The environment does not control the gene. The perception of the environment does. Consciousness precedes biology. Belief precedes manifestation. When someone changes the story they tell themselves about who they are, the cells respond, the neural pathways rewire, the external circumstances shift. This is not magic. This is law. The law of assumption. The law that governs all creation. If consciousness creates reality, and humanity possesses consciousness, then what does that make each person? Not a victim of circumstance. Not a beggar at the feet of fate. But the author of their own existence. How many have lived entire lifetimes believing they were small, powerless, unworthy? How many prayers were whispered into darkness, hoping someone out there might listen? What if every prayer was already answered the moment it was assumed to be true? The lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard reveal that manifestation is not about convincing a separate deity to grant wishes. It is about aligning inner conviction with desired reality until the two become indistinguishable. When someone fully embodies the state of being they wish to experience, the outer world has no choice but to conform. This is the secret hidden in plain sight. The divine is not something to reach. It is something to recognize. And that recognition changes absolutely everything. The law of assumption operates whether someone is aware of it or not. Every moment, consciousness is assuming something about itself, about the world, about what is possible or impossible. These assumptions are not passive observations. They are active creative forces that shape every dimension of experience. When someone assumes they are limited, limitation appears. When someone assumes they are abundant, abundance manifests. The mechanism is simple, yet profound. What is assumed to be true on the inside becomes what is experienced on the outside. This is not philosophy. This is the fundamental operating principle of reality itself. Most people live as if they are separate from the creative process. They observe their circumstances and believe those circumstances are the cause of their feelings. But in the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the sequence is reversed. The feeling comes first. The circumstance follows. Consciousness does not react to reality. Consciousness creates it. When someone feels wealthy before the bank account reflects it, wealth must appear. When someone feels loved before the relationship manifests, love must arrive. The external world is not the starting point. It is the end result. And the starting point is always the inner state of being that has been consciously or unconsciously assumed. Consider the mirror as a metaphor. A mirror does not argue with the one standing before it. It reflects precisely what is presented. If someone stands before a mirror frowning, the mirror shows a frown. No amount of begging the mirror to smile will change the reflection. The only way to change what the mirror shows is to change what stands before it. Reality functions the same way. The outer world mirrors the inner assumption. Trying to change circumstances without changing consciousness is like trying to change the reflection without changing the face. It cannot work. Yet how many spend their entire lives trying to rearrange the mirror instead of transforming themselves? Joe Dispenza's work in neuroplasticity confirms this ancient truth through modern science. The brain does not distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physical one. When someone repeatedly imagines themselves in a new state of being, the neural pathways fire as if that state were already real. The body chemistry shifts. The energy signature changes. And the quantum field responds by collapsing possibilities into actualities that match the new frequency. This is not wishful thinking. This is measurable, observable, repeatable. Consciousness is not a passive witness to reality. Consciousness is the architect, and every human being holds the blueprint. What separates most from this power is not lack of capability, but lack of conviction. The assumption is weak, diluted by doubt, cancelled by contradictory beliefs. One moment someone affirms their desire, the next moment they worry about its absence. One moment they claim their divine nature, the next they surrender to victimhood. The lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard emphasize that assumption must be sustained until it hardens into fact. It must be lived from, not hoped for. When the inner conviction becomes unshakable, the outer manifestation becomes inevitable. The question is not whether someone has the power. The question is whether they will claim it fully. The illusion of separation is the root of all suffering. When someone believes they are separate from the creative source, they feel powerless. When they believe they are separate from their desires, they feel lack. When they believe they are separate from their true nature, they feel lost. But what if separation was never real? What if the sense of being a small isolated self in a vast indifferent universe was simply a story consciousness told itself in order to experience limitation? The moment that story is questioned, the walls begin to crumble. The truth underneath is staggering. There is no separation. There never was. There is only one consciousness expressing through infinite forms. This revelation is not comfortable for the conditioned mind. The conditioned mind has built an entire identity around the idea of being small, separate, struggling. It has collected evidence for years, decades, entire lifetimes to prove that life is hard, that success is rare, that miracles belong to others. To release that identity requires a kind of death. Not physical death, but the death of the false self. The self that believed it was the body, the circumstances, the history. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this death is not something to fear. It is something to embrace. Because what dies is only the limitation. What remains is the infinite creative power that was always present, simply hidden beneath layers of false belief. Imagine a wave believing it is separate from the ocean. The wave rises and falls, appearing distinct, individual, temporary. Yet the wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, temporarily expressing in a particular form. The wave has never stopped being water. It has never stopped being part of the whole. In the same way, the human being has never stopped being divine. The form appears individual. The essence remains universal. When this is truly understood, not just intellectually but experientially, the entire framework of reality transforms. Suddenly, there are no limitations. There are only assumptions waiting to be changed. Greg Braden's research into the quantum field reveals that reality exists as a sea of infinite possibilities until consciousness collapses those possibilities into specific outcomes through observation and belief. The field does not choose for the observer. The observer chooses from the field. Every potential reality already exists. The question is which one will be activated through the focus and feeling of consciousness. This means nothing is being created from nothing. Everything already exists in potential. Manifestation is simply the act of selecting which version of reality to experience by assuming it is already true. The power to choose is absolute. The responsibility is profound. How many have prayed for change while simultaneously assuming nothing will change? How many have wished for abundance while feeling unworthy of receiving it? The contradiction cancels the creation. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the emphasis is always on living from the end. Not hoping for it, not working toward it, but assuming it is already done. When someone can rest in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the external world has no choice but to reflect that inner state. This is not theory. This is law. And the one wielding this law is not some external deity deciding who deserves what. It is the individual consciousness, recognizing itself as the creative power behind all experience. That changes everything. In Genesis capítulo versículo 27, there is a statement that has been read for millennia yet rarely understood in its full power. It says that God created humanity in His own image. In the image of God He created them. What does it mean to be created in the image of the Creator? Not in physical form, for consciousness has no body. Not in personality, for the infinite has no ego. The image is creative capacity, the ability to bring forth from the invisible into the visible through assumption and conviction. When this verse is understood through the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the implications are staggering. Humanity is not simply resembling God. Humanity is God expressing in human form. Every word in that verse carries weight. Created in His image means endowed with the same creative mechanism. In the image of God means possessing the same power to call things that are not as though they were. This is not about worthiness or spiritual advancement. This is about fundamental nature. The divine does not create through effort or struggle. It creates through declaration, through assumption, through the simple act of saying, I am, and following that statement with whatever reality is chosen. When someone says, I am wealthy, they are using the same creative principle that spoke worlds into existence. When someone says, I am healed, they are activating the same law that governs all manifestation. But most have been taught to see themselves as separate, as unworthy, as powerless. Religion often places God at a distance, making the human a beggar pleading for mercy. Yet the very texts used to justify that separation actually confirm the opposite. The divine is not separate. The divine is the essence of every individual consciousness. The separation is an illusion maintained by belief. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this illusion is dismantled completely. The realization that follows is both liberating and terrifying. If there is no separation, then there is no one to blame. There is no external savior. There is only the recognition of one's own creative power and the responsibility that comes with it. How many have lived in pain, believing they were victims of circumstance? How many have suffered under the weight of feeling small, insignificant, powerless? The validation of that pain is essential. It was real. The suffering was real. But the cause was not what it seemed. The cause was not external. The cause was the inner assumption of powerlessness. When that assumption is changed, when someone fully embodies the truth that they are consciousness itself wearing a human form, the entire experience of life transforms. The circumstances that once seemed permanent begin to dissolve. The limitations that once seemed absolute begin to fade. What remains is the infinite creative potential that was always there, waiting to be claimed. This is not about denying pain or bypassing genuine emotion. This is about recognizing the source of creation. When someone understands that their consciousness is not observing reality but generating it, they step into a completely different relationship with existence. They stop being the victim of their story and become the author. They stop waiting for permission from the outside world and start giving it from within. In Genesis capítulo versículo 27, the confirmation is clear. Humanity was never meant to be small. Humanity was created in the image of infinite creative power. And that power is not something to earn. It is something to remember. Something to embody. Something to live from with absolute conviction. When this awakening truly occurs, everything in life reorganizes itself. Relationships that were draining either transform or dissolve. Opportunities that were invisible suddenly appear. Health that seemed impossible begins to restore. Not because the external world suddenly decided to be kind, but because the inner state shifted to match a new assumption. The outer world is always loyal to the inner conviction. Always. Without exception. The lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard make this abundantly clear. Change the assumption, and the manifestation must follow. There is no gap. There is no delay beyond what is believed necessary. The world conforms to consciousness, not the other way around. This means every person carries complete responsibility for their experience. Not blame, but creative responsibility. Blame looks backward and assigns fault. Responsibility looks inward and reclaims power. When someone realizes they have been unconsciously creating their reality through unexamined assumptions, the first reaction might be guilt or shame. But those emotions are simply the old identity resisting its dissolution. The new understanding brings freedom. If consciousness created this reality, consciousness can create a different one. The past does not dictate the future unless it is continuously assumed to do so. Every moment is a fresh opportunity to choose a new assumption, a new state, a new identity. And from that new identity, a new reality must emerge. Consider someone who has lived in poverty for years. The circumstances seem overwhelming, undeniable, fixed. But what created those circumstances? Not the economy. Not bad luck. Not punishment from above. The circumstances were created and sustained by an inner assumption of lack. Perhaps it was inherited from family. Perhaps it was learned through painful experiences. Perhaps it was reinforced by culture and media. But regardless of its origin, the assumption became the invisible filter through which all of life was experienced. When that assumption is identified and replaced with an assumption of abundance, the external circumstances must shift. Not eventually. Not if conditions are right. But inevitably, as surely as the reflection in a mirror changes when the face changes. Tom Campbell's work on consciousness as the fundamental reality confirms what mystics have always known. Physical reality is not the base layer. Consciousness is. Matter, energy, space, time, all of these arise within consciousness, not the other way around. When someone fully grasps this, the absurdity of feeling powerless becomes obvious. How can consciousness be powerless over what consciousness itself is creating? The only power external circumstances have is the power given to them through belief. The moment belief is withdrawn and redirected, the circumstances lose their hold. This is not positive thinking. This is ontological truth. Reality is consciousness made visible. Change the consciousness, change the reality. It cannot be otherwise. What stops most from applying this truth is the addiction to evidence. The mind says, "Show me proof first, then I will believe." But the law works in reverse. Believe first, and the proof must appear. Assume the state first, and the evidence will follow. This requires a kind of faith, but not blind faith. It is faith based on understanding how creation actually works. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this is called living from the end. Not waiting for the end. Not working toward the end. But assuming the end is already accomplished and living in that assumption until the outer world catches up. When someone can maintain that inner conviction despite contrary appearances, they have mastered the art of conscious creation. And at that point, nothing remains impossible. The existential impact of this truth cannot be overstated. When someone fully realizes they are not a fragment of God but God in human form, the entire structure of fear collapses. What is there to fear when the creative power of the universe flows through every thought, every assumption, every declaration of "I am"? Fear exists only in the illusion of separation, in the belief that something external has power over the internal. But when the internal is recognized as the source of all external experience, fear loses its foundation. What remains is not reckless arrogance, but profound responsibility. The power to create is absolute. The question is whether it will be wielded consciously or unconsciously, deliberately or by default. Think of a theater where one person plays every role. The hero, the villain, the victim, the savior, all performed by the same actor wearing different costumes. From the audience, the characters seem separate, distinct, in conflict. But backstage, the truth is obvious. There is only one performer. Consciousness is that performer. The external world is the stage. Every person encountered, every situation experienced, every challenge faced is consciousness presenting itself in various forms to interact with itself. When this is understood experientially, Not just intellectually, compassion becomes natural. Judgment dissolves. How can consciousness judge itself? How can the ocean be angry at its own waves? The illusion of separation creates conflict. The recognition of unity creates peace. This recognition transforms the relationship with the body as well. For so long, the body has been seen as the prison of the soul, the limitation of the spirit. But in the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the body is understood as the instrument through which consciousness experiences physical reality. It is not the master. It is the servant. When consciousness assumes health, the body responds. When consciousness assumes vitality, the cells reorganize. The body does not dictate to consciousness what is possible. Consciousness dictates to the body what will be experienced. Every symptom, every sensation, every condition is a reflection of an inner state that has been assumed, consciously or unconsciously, as true. Change the assumption, and the body has no choice but to follow. The call now is not to seek something outside, but to embody something within. To stop waiting for permission and start giving it. To stop hoping for change and start assuming it is already done. This is the shift from victim consciousness to creator consciousness. From believing life happens to you, to knowing life happens through you. From seeing circumstances as causes, to recognizing them as effects. The lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard provide the framework, but the application must be personal. No one can do this for another. No external authority can grant this power because it was never external to begin with. It has always been within, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be lived from with absolute conviction. What would change if someone woke up tomorrow fully embodying the truth that they are God in human form? Not in ego but in essence. Not in pride, but in recognition. The neediness would vanish. The begging would stop. The desperation would dissolve. In its place would be a calm, unshakable knowing that whatever is assumed with conviction must manifest. The external world would lose its power to disturb because the source of all power would be recognized as internal. Challenges would be seen not as obstacles, but as invitations to choose a new assumption. Pain would be honored, but not worshipped. And from that centered, empowered state, reality would bend, shift, and reorganize itself to match the inner conviction. This is not fantasy. This is the natural order of existence when consciousness awakens to its own nature. There is a simple practice that brings this understanding from concept into embodied experience. It requires no rituals, no special tools, no external validation. It begins with stillness. In a quiet moment, perhaps before sleep or upon waking, attention turns inward. Not to analyze or fix, but simply to rest in awareness. In that stillness, a statement emerges, not as wishful thinking but as quiet declaration. I am. Just those two words. Not I will be, or I hope to become. But I am. Present tense. Absolute. The same creative force that spoke reality into existence now speaks through this individual consciousness. After the I am comes the assumption of the desired state. Not the external thing, but the internal feeling of already being it. I am abundant. I am loved. I am whole. The words matter less than the feeling they generate. The goal is to rest in that feeling, to inhabit it completely, to let it saturate every cell until the body believes it as much as the mind declares it. This is not pretending. This is assuming. And assumption, when sustained, becomes fact. The external evidence will follow, but it cannot lead. The internal conviction must come first. When someone can fall asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, they have planted the seed in the only soil that matters, their own consciousness. For those discovering these truths, this is an invitation. Not to join something external, but to recognize what has always been internal. Consider subscribing to continue this journey of awakening. Activate the notification bell so that each new exploration of consciousness reaches you when it is released. These are not casual videos. These are transmissions of ancient truth filtered through modern understanding. Every teaching builds on the last. Every revelation deepens the recognition. The algorithm may or may not favor this content, but those who are ready will find it. Or rather, it will find them. Because consciousness always draws to itself what matches its frequency. Where does someone begin when they realize they have been unconsciously creating suffering? Where does the transformation start when the weight of responsibility feels overwhelming? It starts with one simple shift. From seeing themselves as a victim of reality to recognizing themselves as the author of it. From believing power resides elsewhere to claiming it resides within. From hoping God will intervene to understanding that God is not separate from them, not distant from them, not withholding anything from them. God is them, expressing through them, creating through them, waiting for them to remember. And in that remembering, everything that seemed impossible becomes not only possible, but inevitable. The greatest teaching is this: there is no separation between the divine and the human. There never was. The search for God is God searching for itself through human experience. The longing for wholeness is wholeness temporarily forgetting its nature in order to experience the joy of rediscovery. Every person is the infinite wearing a finite mask, the eternal playing in time, the formless dancing as form. When this is known, truly known, not as philosophy but as lived reality, the entire game changes. Suffering becomes optional. Limitation becomes a choice. And manifestation becomes as natural as breathing. Because the one doing the breathing, the one reading these words, the one feeling the pull toward transformation, that one is not separate from the creative source. That one is the creative source, temporarily pretending to be separate so the awakening can be experienced. And now, the awakening is here.